Have you ever stood in a house of worship surrounded by fervent believers and felt nothing? Not anger, not defiance, but a profound and unsettling silence where a divine presence was supposed to be? It's a quiet, private thought that many of us are taught to suppress, to label as a failure of faith, or a flaw in our own character. But what if it isn't a flaw? What if that silence is, in fact, the most honest answer we're ever going to get? Welcome to the God Mirage. This channel is a space for that question, and for all the others that follow. It's a place for the skeptics, the doubters, the spiritual nomads, and anyone who suspects that the grand, ornate edifice of organized religion might be built on a foundation of sand. Our goal here is not to mock for the sake of mockery, but to subject the most monumental claim in human history, the existence of an all-powerful, all-knowing God, to the same rigorous scrutiny we would apply to any other extraordinary idea. We will use the tools of logic, the lens of science, and the unflinching gaze of reason to look directly at the sun, even if we've been told our whole lives that doing so will make us blind. Today, we begin at the beginning. We are going to construct piece by piece the foundational case for why a rational mind, when presented with all the available evidence, should find the existence of God to be a highly improbable, if not impossible, proposition. We are laying the cornerstone for a worldview based not on ancient books or handed-down dogma, but on the observable, testable, and demonstrable reality of the universe we inhabit. Before we embark on this journey, it's worth acknowledging that for many, simply watching a video like this is a quiet act of rebellion. In a vast portion of our world, to be openly skeptical of religious belief is to be an outsider, to risk straining relationships with family, friends, and your community. It can be a lonely position to hold. So, as we begin, I'd like you to do something. In the comments below, tell us what country or region you're watching from, and perhaps share a thought on whether being skeptic is easy or difficult where you are. Let's create a map of critical thought and remind each other that we aren't as alone as it sometimes feels. And while you're down there, if this is the kind of exploration that resonates with you, consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. It tells the great mysterious algorithm that these conversations are worth having. Now, let's get to it. Let's examine the truth that religion won't tell you. The problem of evil, a universe indifferent to suffering. If we are to talk about God, we must first talk about suffering. Because if there is a single, glaring, insurmountable piece of evidence against the existence of a benevolent creator, it is the sheer scale and character of suffering in our world. This isn't just a philosophical puzzle box. It is a brutal, lived reality. It is the baby born with Tay-Sachs disease whose nervous system will degenerate, leading to a slow, painful, and inevitable death before the age of 4. It is the gazelle, torn apart, still living, by a pack of wild dogs. It is the millions lost to the Black Death, the tens of thousands swallowed by a single tsunami, the silent, anonymous agony of a creature starving to death in a forest we will never see. This is the problem of evil, and it is perhaps the oldest and most powerful argument against theism. The classical formulation, often attributed to the Greek philosopher Epicurus, is devastatingly simple. It goes like this. If God is omnibenevolent, that is all good and all loving, he must want to prevent evil and suffering. If God is omnipotent, that is all powerful, he must be able to prevent evil and suffering. And if God is omniscient, that is all knowing, he must know about all instances of evil and suffering and know how to prevent them. And yet, evil and suffering exist. They are not rare, occasional occurrences. They are woven into the very fabric of biological existence. Therefore, one of the premises must be false. Either God does not want to prevent evil, in which case he is not all good, or he is not able to prevent evil, in which case he is not all-powerful, or he doesn't know about it, in which case he is not all-knowing, or, most logically, a being with all three of these properties simply does not exist. For centuries, theologians and apologists have labored to create defenses, known as theodicies, to wriggle out of this seemingly airtight logical trap. Let's examine the most common of these defenses and see how they hold up under pressure. The most popular defense by a wide margin is the argument from free will. The story goes that God, in His wisdom, gifted humanity with the freedom to choose between good and evil. The suffering we see in the world, therefore, is not God's fault. It's our fault. It's the price of our freedom. Without the possibility of choosing evil, our choice to do good would be meaningless. On the surface, it sounds plausible, almost noble, but when you begin to prod at it, the entire structure collapses. First and most obviously, the free will defense only addresses one specific category of evil, moral evil, the suffering that humans inflict upon one another. It has absolutely nothing to say about the immense category of natural evil. Whose free will was exercised when the Lisbon earthquake of 1755 killed up to 50,000 people, many of whom were crushed in their churches on All Saints' Day? Did the tectonic plates choose to shift? Whose moral failing is represented by childhood leukemia, by Parkinson's, by the parasite that burrows into a child's eye and blinds them? To blame these horrors on Adam and Eve's dietary choices in a mythical garden, as some fundamentalists do, is not a serious answer. It's a desperate retreat into mythology to avoid confronting a terrifying reality. The vast majority of suffering on this planet has nothing to do with human choice. Second, the argument creates a paradox when we consider the concept of heaven. Most religious doctrines promise a heaven where believers will live in eternal bliss, free from suffering and evil. Presumably, the inhabitants of heaven still possess free will. If they don't, then heaven is not a paradise of free beings, but a celestial prison of mindless, pre-programmed automatons. But if they do have free will in heaven, and yet there is no evil or suffering there, it proves that it is entirely possible for God to create a state of existence where free will and the absence of evil coexist. And if it's possible to create that state in heaven, why not create it here on earth? The only logical conclusion is that God could have made a world without suffering, but chose not to. This brings us right back to the original problem. A being who willingly chooses to create a world filled with pointless agony cannot be called all good. Third, the very nature of this free will is questionable. It presents a false dichotomy, either robotic predetermination or a freedom that necessitates the possibility of committing the most heinous acts imaginable. Could an all-powerful being not have created humans with a nature that, while free, was strongly inclined toward empathy and goodness? We do it ourselves in a clumsy, biological way. Most people are born with an innate sense of empathy. We don't have to debate whether or not to feel sad when we see a child crying. Why couldn't a perfect creator have simply nudged our moral compass a few degrees closer to compassion, making cruelty a remote, abhorrent possibility rather than a daily occurrence? To claim he couldn't is to limit his power. To claim he wouldn't is to question his goodness. Another common defense is the mysterious ways argument. This is the ultimate intellectual get-out-of-jail-free card. It posits that suffering, while it seems terrible to us, is part of a grand divine plan that our finite minds cannot comprehend. The pain serves a greater good that we cannot see. This is not an argument. It is the abandonment of argument. It is an appeal to ignorance. To say that God's goodness is not like our goodness, that His reasons are beyond our understanding, is to render the word good utterly meaningless. If in God's good plan it is necessary for a toddler to be tortured to death, then the word good has been stretched to include its exact opposite. It's like saying the circle is a square, but in a mysterious way that you can't understand. It's nonsense. It explains everything and therefore explains nothing. Furthermore, it's a classic example of special pleading. In any other context, if a human father claimed that locking his child in a basement and starving him was part of a mysterious, loving plan, we would rightly call him a monster and lock him away. Yet, when this same logic is applied to a celestial father, it's supposed to be accepted as profound wisdom. Finally, there's the character-building defense. This is the idea that suffering is necessary for our spiritual and moral development. Hardship makes us stronger, more compassionate, more resilient. Again, this argument wilts under the slightest scrutiny. While it's true that some people can emerge from hardship with newfound strength, It is equally, if not more, true that immense suffering simply breaks people. It leaves them with trauma, with depression, with a shattered view of the world. What character is being built in a person who suffers from debilitating chronic pain their entire life? More to the point, what possible character-building lesson is learned by the infant dying of a genetic disease? The student dies before they can even comprehend the lesson. The sheer disproportion of it all is staggering. Is a tsunami that kills 100,000 people a reasonable tool for teaching the survivors a lesson in compassion? It's like using a nuclear bomb to light a candle. The method is so grotesquely out of proportion to the supposed goal that it points not to a wise teacher, but to a clumsy, indifferent, or malevolent force. When we strip away these flawed theodicies, we are left with the raw data. The universe we observe is not one that appears to be managed by a benevolent, personal intelligence. It is a universe that functions according to impersonal, amoral, and often brutal physical and biological laws. A deer does not starve because it needs to learn a lesson. It starves because there is not enough food, and its metabolism requires a certain number of calories to function. A virus does not kill a child as part of a divine plan. It kills a child because it has evolved to replicate, and the child's body is a hospitable environment for that replication. The problem of evil is not just a problem. It is a resounding declaration. It is the universe screaming at us that if there is a God, it is either not powerful enough to stop the horror, not good enough to want to, or it simply isn't there at all. The God mirage shimmers and fades when faced with the first, most fundamental reality of existence, that life is filled with pain, and the heavens remain silent. The silent heavens. The argument from divine hiddenness. This leads us directly to our second major line of reasoning. The argument from divine hiddenness. If the problem of evil challenges God's goodness, the argument from divine hiddenness challenges his very desire for a relationship with us. It poses a simple yet profound question. If a personal loving God exists and desires for all of humanity to know and worship him, why does he make his existence so profoundly ambiguous? Why is he hiding? Let's consider the stakes. According to most major monotheistic religions, particularly Christianity and Islam, belief in God is not merely a lifestyle choice or a philosophical preference. It is a matter of eternal consequence. Your everlasting soul hangs in the balance. Believing correctly leads to an eternity of bliss in heaven, while failing to believe or believing in the wrong God leads to an eternity of torment in hell. The stakes could not possibly be higher. Now, imagine a loving parent who has a life-saving medicine for their child. The child is sick, confused, and doesn't know the medicine exists. What would that loving parent do? Would they hide the medicine in a locked box, buried in the backyard, and leave behind a series of cryptic, contradictory, and ancient clues, hoping the child figures it out? Of course not. That would be the act of a psychopath. A loving parent would walk directly to the child, administer the medicine clearly and unambiguously, and ensure their child is saved. If God is a loving celestial parent and belief is the life-saving medicine, his behavior is utterly baffling. He has chosen a method of communication that is, by any objective measure, catastrophically inefficient and obscure. Consider the evidence typically offered for God's existence. First, there are the holy books, the Bible, the Quran, the Vedas, the Book of Mormon, and countless others. These texts are presented as the direct word or revelation of God. Yet they are rife with internal contradictions, historical and scientific inaccuracies, and moral teachings that we now find abhorrent. More importantly, they are mutually exclusive. They all claim to be the one true path, and they all condemn the followers of the other paths. A Christian believes the Quran is a false revelation. A Muslim believes the Bible has been corrupted. A Hindu may view them both as interesting but ultimately misguided stories. Why would an all-knowing God who wants to be known by everyone reveal himself in such a fragmented, confusing, and contradictory way? Why would he inspire dozens of competing true religions, ensuring that, by their own logic, the vast majority of humanity is doomed from the start. It's like a CEO sending out 10 completely different and contradictory mission statements to his employees, and then firing everyone who doesn't follow the real one. It's a strategy for failure. Then there is the evidence of personal experience or revelation. The feeling of God's presence, the burning in the bosom, the voice heard in prayer. This is perhaps the most common reason people give for their belief. And we shouldn't dismiss these experiences as fake. They are very real to the people having them. The problem is that these feelings are not a reliable pathway to truth. A Mormon missionary feeling the Spirit confirmed that Joseph Smith was a prophet is having a genuine emotional experience. A Muslim Sufi mystic feeling a state of ecstatic union with Allah is also having a genuine emotional experience. A Pentecostal Christian speaking in tongues and a Hindu bhakti yogi chanting in rapturous devotion to Krishna are both having genuine emotional experiences. These experiences all confirm to the believer that their specific theology is the correct one. Yet these theologies are mutually contradictory. These feelings cannot all be pointing to the objective truth. What they are evidence of is the power of the human brain to generate profound emotional and psychological states, often influenced by culture, expectation, and deep-seated emotional needs. It's evidence of human psychology, not divine communication. An all-knowing God would be aware of this. He would know that subjective feelings are a terrible way to convey objective truth. A God who truly wanted to be known would provide evidence that is public, objective, universal, and verifiable. Evidence that is available to everyone, regardless of their culture or emotional state. He could write, "I exist, I am Yahweh," in the stars in every language on earth. He could cause a mountain to levitate a few feet off the ground, permanently. He could ensure that every prayer for an amputee to regrow a limb was answered. He could do any number of things that would provide clear, unambiguous proof of his existence in nature. But he does none of these things. Instead, he allegedly whispers in the hearts of some, provides ancient contradictory texts, and allows the natural world to operate according to physical laws that require no divine intervention whatsoever. This brings us to a crucial point about non-belief. Theism often frames non-belief as a rebellious, prideful choice. The atheist chooses to reject God out of arrogance or a desire to sin. But the argument from divine hiddenness shows this to be a profound mischaracterization. For many, if not most skeptics, non-belief is not a willful rebellion. It is the result of a sincere, honest search for truth that comes up empty-handed. It is the state of what philosopher John Schellenberg calls reasonable non-belief. When a person honestly seeks evidence for a proposition and finds none, the only rational position to hold is one of non-belief. If God exists and desires a relationship with us, then there should be no such thing as a reasonable non-believer. His existence should be so obvious that to deny it would be akin to denying the existence of the sun. The fact that millions of intelligent, sincere, and morally decent people can scour the universe for evidence of God and find nothing is, in itself, perhaps the most powerful evidence that there is nothing to be found. So, I want to put a question to you now, here in the middle of our discussion. It's for anyone who has ever genuinely tried to believe or who has struggled with their faith. When you went looking for God, what did you find? Was there a moment of connection, a feeling of presence that convinced you? Or did you, like so many of us, encounter a profound and deafening silence? Share your experience in the comments. There's no judgment here. Let's talk about what it's really like to search for a God who seems determined to stay hidden. The silence of the heavens, the ambiguity of the evidence, and the existence of reasonable non-belief all point in the same direction. The world does not look like a place inhabited by a God who desperately wants to be found. It looks exactly like a world with no God at all. The divine hiddenness is not a test of faith. It is a signpost for an absence. It is another critical tear in the fabric of the God mirage. The retreat into the gaps. For most of human history, God was not a philosophical concept. He was a job description. He was the celestial mechanic, the cosmic weatherman, the divine physician. Why does the sun cross the sky? Because God or God wills it so. What causes lightning and thunder? The wrath of a deity. Why do we get sick? Demonic influence or divine punishment. Why does life in all its spectacular diversity exist? Because God sculpted it in an act of special creation. For millennia, God did it was the default, and frankly, the only explanation for almost every phenomenon in the natural world. Then something remarkable happened. We began to find better answers that were testable, predictable, and didn't require us to believe in an invisible being in the sky. Copernicus and Galileo showed that the Earth orbits the Sun, a process governed by gravity, not divine will. Benjamin Franklin demonstrated that lightning was a natural electrical discharge, not a thunderbolt from Zeus or Yahweh. Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, with their germ theory, proved that disease was caused by microorganisms, not by sins. And most profoundly, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, through the theory of evolution by natural selection, provided a stunningly elegant, entirely naturalistic mechanism for the diversity of life on Earth. With each scientific breakthrough, the territory of God shrinks. He has been evicted time and time again from his previous homes. He has lost his job as the sun mover, the rainmaker, the life creator. So where does the modern believer find God? They find him in the shadows, and they find him in the gaps of our scientific knowledge. This is the famous God of the gaps fallacy. The argument, in its modern form, goes something like this. You scientists can explain a lot, but you can't explain this. You can't explain what caused the Big Bang. You can't explain exactly how non-living chemicals first assembled into a self-replicating life form, a process called abiogenesis. You can't explain consciousness, therefore God must have done it. God is in that gap. This is, to put it mildly, an argument from a position of profound weakness. It is a theology of ignorance. It turns God from a majestic creator into a cosmic lurker, hiding in the ever-dwindling pockets of what we don't yet know. It's a deity on life support, sustained only by the ever-thinning air of our own ignorance. And history has shown, again and again, that this is a terrible place to build your faith. The gap where God resided yesterday is the subject of a Nobel Prize-winning paper tomorrow. Placing God in a gap is to sentence him to a slow, inevitable death by 1,000 discoveries. Furthermore, it's an intellectually lazy maneuver. When a scientist encounters a gap in their knowledge, they say, "I don't know, let's find out." It is a call to adventure, an impetus for investigation. The God of the gaps proponent, however, looks at that same gap and says, "I don't know, therefore I know. It was God." They slap a divine label on the mystery and the inquiry stops. It is the end of curiosity, not the beginning of wisdom. The truth religion won't tell you is that their God is no longer the grand explanation for the world we see, but a fugitive, forever on the run from the advancing light of human knowledge. A Babel of Beliefs. If a single universal God wanted to communicate his one true message to all of humanity, what would we expect to see? We would expect to see a single, consistent, and universally accessible revelation. A message so clear and compelling that it would over time converge and unite humanity under a common understanding of the divine. Now, look at the world around us. What do we actually see? We see the exact opposite. We see a chaotic, cacophonous marketplace of thousands upon thousands of mutually exclusive religions, denominations, and sects, each one vehemently claiming to be the one and only holder of absolute truth. The Christian God Yahweh is a trinity. The Muslim God, Allah, is a strict unity, and to suggest he is a trinity is the greatest of all sins. For a Hindu, divinity can be expressed in millions of forms or as a single impersonal reality called Brahman. A Buddhist might tell you the very question of a creator God is irrelevant to the path of enlightenment. A Sikh believes in Ik Onkar, the one supreme reality. A Zoroastrian places their faith in a cosmic battle between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. These are not minor disagreements over liturgical details. These are fundamental, irreconcilable contradictions about the very nature of God and reality. They all cannot be right. Logically, if one of them is right, all the others must be wrong. And what does it mean if, say, Southern Baptist Christianity is the one and only truth? It means God has allowed over 80% of the world's population, including billions of sincere Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and Jews, to be tragically and damnably mistaken. It is a communication plan with a failure rate that would get any mortal manager fired on the spot. The most damning piece of evidence in this regard is the simple fact of the accident of birth. The single greatest predictor of a person's religious beliefs is not evidence, not reason, not spiritual seeking, but the longitude and latitude of their birthplace. If you are born in Pakistan, the odds are overwhelming that you will be a Muslim. If you are born in Ireland, you will most likely be a Catholic. If you are born in Thailand, a Buddhist. In Utah, a Mormon. In India, a Hindu. Are we to believe that God, in His infinite wisdom, decided that your eternal salvation should be determined by a cosmic lottery of geography? That your access to the one, capital T truth depends on the faith of your parents? This makes no sense from the perspective of a universal, loving God. But it makes perfect sense if we understand religion for what it clearly is: a cultural phenomenon. A system of beliefs, myths, and rituals passed down from one generation to the next, evolving and diverging over time, just like language, art, and music. Religion is not a divine revelation. It is a human invention. The truth that religion won't tell you is that your deeply held sacred beliefs are, in all likelihood, a product of your culture, not a message from the cosmos. The elegance of simplicity. So, we stand at a crossroads. We have examined the evidence. We have seen a universe filled with pointless suffering, a God who remains stubbornly hidden, a faith that retreats into the gaps, and a world fractured by 1,000 competing truths. What is the most rational conclusion we can draw from all of this? Here we can employ one of the most powerful tools in the skeptic's toolkit, the principle of parsimony, more famously known as Occam's razor. The principle states that when faced with competing explanations for the same phenomenon, we should prefer the one that is simpler, the one that makes the fewest assumptions. Let's apply it. We have two competing hypotheses to explain the universe as we find it. Hypothesis. One is the theistic hypothesis. It posits that the universe and everything in it was created by, and is possibly sustained by, a supernatural being. This being is typically described as an uncaused, non-physical, timeless, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good, personal mind. This mind exists outside of space and time, yet can interact with our world. This explanation requires us to assume the existence of an entirely new, supernatural realm and a being whose properties are not only unproven, but are arguably logically incoherent. It doesn't actually explain the complexity of the universe, it just punts the problem up a level to an even greater, more inexplicable complexity. Hypothesis. 2 is the naturalistic hypothesis. It posits that the universe we observe is all there is. It operates according to consistent, impersonal physical laws. Complexity, including life and consciousness, arises from simple components over immense periods of time through emergent processes. This hypothesis makes no assumptions about supernatural realms or invisible beings. It works only with the evidence we have. While it has unanswered questions, such as the ultimate origin of the physical laws themselves, it does not invent a complex magical answer and pretend it's a solution. It simply acknowledges the limits of our current knowledge and keeps looking. Which of these is the simpler explanation? It's not even a contest. The naturalistic hypothesis is vastly more parsimonious. It doesn't multiply entities beyond necessity. The God hypothesis, on the other hand, is the ultimate violation of Occam's razor. It is the most complex and extravagant assumption one could possibly make. It is an explanation that is infinitely more complex than the thing it seeks to explain. Therefore, the rational, intellectually honest position is to provisionally accept the simpler explanation until evidence warrants accepting the more complex one. The truth religion won't tell you is that God is not a necessary explanation for anything. He is a grand, elaborate, and unnecessary complication. Conclusion: waking from the dream. So why doesn't God exist? Because a universe with a good and powerful God would not be saturated with gratuitous, agonizing suffering. Because a God who desired a relationship with us would not hide behind ambiguity and silence. Because the claims of religion have been systematically replaced by the verifiable truths of science, forcing God into an ever-shrinking corner of our ignorance. Because the sheer variety of conflicting religions points to a human origin, not a divine one. And because ultimately the idea of God is a needlessly complex hypothesis for a universe that can be much more simply explained without it. Each of these arguments is a powerful thread, but when woven together, they create an inescapable tapestry of doubt. They show us that the God of classical theism is not a coherent, plausible reality, but a mirage, a shimmering illusion constructed from our deepest hopes, our most profound fears, and our ancient ignorance of the world. Stepping away from that mirage can be frightening. It means accepting that we are alone in a vast, indifferent cosmos. It means acknowledging that justice is a human concept, not a cosmic guarantee. But it can also be profoundly liberating. It means we are free. Free to create our own meaning. Free to build our own morality based on empathy and reason. Free to appreciate the staggering beauty and terrifying contingency of our one precious life without the need for supernatural fairy tales. This is the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. It is a world without a celestial Father watching over us. And it is in this world, the real world, that we must live and strive and find our purpose. Thank you for joining us on this exploration at the God Mirage. If this conversation resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the biggest questions of all. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. And for one last thought, let us know in the comments which of these arguments you find the most compelling, or if there's another argument you think is even stronger. Let's continue the conversation. Until next time, keep questioning.